And I'm very happy to welcome Lukitsh and Stephan Berwick to this very special episode of In Discussion With, celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Chinese Wushu Research Institute, which was founded by Master Bosim Mark, very well-known martial artist, a pioneer in her field in the USA, one of the early pioneers to bring these arts to the West, particularly to the USA. So this is a major achievement, and thank you for being here today.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you for inviting us.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely, Byron. I mean, your podcast, the Drunken Podcast, it's really great stuff. So, it's great to be recognized like this and be, especially for Bosim Mark and her school and her accomplishments. So really appreciate that.
For sure. And the thing about Bosim Mark is, I think we're talking 50 years of the Institute already. And for some of the younger martial artists, the people that are younger in the field of Chinese martial arts, they might have heard a little bit about her or something, but maybe you guys want to, or whoever one of you wants to, or both of you want to give a bit of a background of Master Bosim Mark and the Institute itself.
Yeah, Jean, go for it. I think it'd be great for Jean to start on this one.
Okay, yeah. I started studying at the Chinese Wushu Research Institute with Sifu Mark in 1978. And at that point, the school had been in existence here in Boston for 2 years. And it was extremely popular. I mean, what I heard was when she came to Boston, she was a real sensation. First of all, it was very unusual at that time to find a woman who was teaching and practicing at the highest level of Chinese martial arts. And I know that the background before she came to Boston that I was told was that she had started training in grade school, learning Nanchuan, and then had gotten interested in Tai Chi when she was in high school in China, in Guangzhou. And then she was competing on the local Wushu team and winning prizes. And she expected to be able to advance to a regional team that was going to be doing some tours around Asia. But she was blocked because of her family's political background.
The good old days.
Yeah.
Yep.
Her father had been a judge for the Kuomintang, and so the communist government at that time, they were worried that she was going to defect if she was allowed to leave China. And from what I understand, the truth is her husband, Mr. Yen, and their son Donnie had already moved to Hong Kong.
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah. And she actually, obviously the details were a little unclear, but I understand that she was able to find a way to cross the Pearl River to Hong Kong the day after her daughter Chris was born.
Wow.
And I know, because they weren't watching her, they assumed that nobody would, try to leave China immediately after giving birth. But I saw her ID card for when she first came to China, and she's holding this tiny little day-old baby in her arms.
Wow.
And so it was, it's like something out of a movie. And then when she got to Hong Kong, she ended up teaching sword dancing at a famous nightclub, the Miramar nightclub. It was well known for traditional Chinese performing arts. So she was teaching sword dancing. She was performing there, doing sword forms, singing. She was also trained as a singer. And two of the women in the dance troupe there were sisters of the director, Yuen Wo-ping. And that's where the family connection, the Yen family and the Yuen family first originated at the Miramar nightclub. But she did get a chance to come to the United States with a team that was touring both Chinese and American martial artists. And Mr. Yen, her husband, had relatives in Boston, and so the goal was to settle in Boston. And she taught for a while at MIT, I think for probably about 2 years, or a year and a half maybe. She taught at MIT, she taught at some other institutions. She taught out of her living room in Chinatown, and she also taught for a while out of the Walum School in Boston's Chinatown.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, July 10th, 1976, she started her own school. But she already had students. People had already been coming to train with her. So there are photos from that opening day. The one that I like the best, it's she's sitting in the front, Donnie's right behind her, and all the other Chinatown masters are seated to either side of her, and then her students are all standing behind them. Very traditional photo. So when I came 2 years later, it was almost like walking into a Hong Kong movie. It really had that vibe to it.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and for me, I mean, perfectly stemming from that. So Jean, I'm so happy she cites that photo, because that was one of the photos that drew my attention. So I joined school in the early 80s. I moved to Boston for college. That was in 83. And I actually had transferred from another college specifically so I can be a student at the Chinese Wushu Research Institute. And that picture of her sitting down with the other masters, if you will, that was a very important picture, because back then in the East Coast of the United States, there was an organization called it was like the East Coast Kung Fu Federation. And it was a federation of leading master teachers in New York, in Boston, and Washington, D.C., kind of like that northeast corridor of our country. And she was the first woman to be sitting right up there in equal terms with these guys.
Yeah.
And that kind of built a whole other legend around her that, that both Jean and I really want to talk about more, I think, from our two perspectives and experiences, because can you imagine what that was like for her to do that? All right. And because the Kung Fu world, especially, you're talking we're talking mostly people who come from more of that southern, that more, Guangzhou type of a thing. This I'll have to say it can be very patriarchal, so to speak, Oh,
it definitely is. I mean,
right.
Yeah.
Oh God, yeah. So she managed to hold her own with that. And if you listen to some of the videos that her daughter, Chris Yen, has been putting out online, and speak to some of the students from who not only from our early era, but who came later, this is sometimes brought up a lot. And so that really impressed me before I even went there. And then obviously, as Donnie Yen's reputation, son's reputation started to grow, it was still early in his time. I saw him at a tournament in New York City when I was in high school, actually, because I'm from New York originally. And of course, I was blown away because I'd never seen Wushu, the more standardized stuff, but done the way they did it back then, which was fairly traditional in a lot of
It's
context.
a different generation to what it became.
Absolutely. I was deeply impressed with that. And that was after his first training stint in Beijing. And so this is now 80, I guess that was probably 82, maybe 81, 82. And I was like, wow, damn, I'd seen the Beijing Wushu team when they traveled the world. But I was like, he's an American, you know what I mean? And his mother is, in Cantonese, Bosun Mark, and for the Mandarin speakers out there, Baoma Chan, you know what I mean? And it really, I was like, I got to go there. And so when I joined up, it was 83. It was early 83 when I joined up.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, you bring up that important point about not only the culture surrounding traditional Chinese martial arts, and as a woman being, as an equal in those, but more importantly, we're talking about the 70s, I mean,
yeah.
Even if you think about today's day and age where you think, okay, these traditional mindsets still exist, but society is a lot different. You're talking about not only a traditional Chinese martial arts environment, but the 70s we had a different environment as well, and she was in there, and
Yep.
she said so. As a pioneer in terms of bringing the arts is one thing, but as a pioneer, as a woman breaking into this field in that environment is something quite special as well. So, that's
Yeah,
great.
it really is. And so like Jean, actually, I mean, Jean, I say this for real. I'm genuine about this. Jean actually inspired a lot of people, because here is Jean, you know what I mean, coming there, seemingly a normal woman, Pennsylvania, young woman, you know what I mean, coming over there and actually really like, Jean is the longest running, closest, disciple student, if you will, and really inspirational, I mean, Jean, by the way, my girlfriend at the time remembers you so much more than almost anybody else, because she was so impressed with you back then, because it's like, it was clear both Sim Mark were women. And then, so a bunch of guys are at the school, of course. And then when Donnie came back after his second movie, even more guys were there. But there was also a lot of women there. But you were the one person who really went through everything and stayed the course. And she remembers you, Jean, remembers your performances and all of that.
Wow. At the time, Sifu had so many good students, and she did have a lot of women students. And I felt like I was not particularly athletic. I first heard about her when I was taking a Tai Chi class in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And people there were talking about, they didn't know her name, but they knew there was this Chinese woman teaching in Boston who was just supposed to be really, really incredible. And so I heard that, and I knew people in Boston, so I arranged to go visit my friends for a vacation, and I tracked down her school. And I watched the class, and then I paid my money for the first month's tuition. I bought my shirt, and then I went and rented an apartment in Allston, and went back to Pittsburgh, packed my bags, and moved to Boston. That was the beginning of September 1978. And until I went to visit that summer, I had not really considered changing my life to that extent, but I was just so impressed by what I saw. But at the time I felt like, I wasn't really, there were a lot of people that were a lot better than me, both men and women. I couldn't do the jumps or anything. I was mostly just focused on the internal styles. And I have to say, there's a lot to be said for just showing up every day. Sifu used to say sometimes 10 years go by every day the same. And that's sort of what it was like. You just keep showing up and keep doing what she tells you. The years go by and you almost don't even notice how much you're taking in. But it was just always so fascinating. And what a great group of students she had. She seemed to attract really the best and brightest. Not just from the Boston area, but, like me, there were, like Stephan, people would come from other cities, even from other countries, just to train with her.
Which speaks to her influence. Her influence on folks here is really wide and far. The first person to teach contemporary wushu, especially the way it was meant to be in the old days. Plus, she has all of this depth in traditional in traditional martial art, particularly by way of the Fu family.
Yeah.
And that's a whole other conversation. But the thing is, what stuck out to me, and I think most other people, was just her high levels, especially what we saw at the time, and her professionalism. This was not someone who was a doctor, lawyer, whatever, and part-time would teach some martial art. She was a full-time professional, trained since very young. And she had this very distinct balance of traditional training as well as the contemporary training. And so she had so much to offer. So all different routines, forms, applications, different styles. It was almost bewildering what she had to offer. And then for me, I went there not to learn internal, even though she has all this distinction, is that I went there to learn, Chang Tuan and all that stuff, Tang Lang, to all of that. And she started me out doing very traditional material. Then I spent a decent amount of time doing old school wushu, if you will. But for me, my heart and soul, my love was always traditional. And she left me with the kind of foundation, which I think you've heard this before from students you may have spoken to, that persists to this day. And her quality, I mean, if you look at the videos of her, and I want your audience to know it's not just performing forms. If you look at videos, there's a snippet of a video of her and Jean doing a Tuisho push hands application set. And it's actually quite legit and rich and dense and beautiful and wonderful.
I was watching that earlier today, actually, and that's one of the things that struck out at me. If you look at it piece by piece, you still have to think that and understand that you're doing a performance. So you've got to also take into consideration what you're going to do for the audience. But when you look at what the content is there as well, it's just was striking with that exactly as you mentioned there. And
that's right.
Those early days, what was the martial arts environment like in Boston, like in general? I know we're not just talking about Chinese martial arts, we're talking about general martial arts mentality. What was popular? The early 70s, there couldn't have been a hell of a lot of people that even knew what Chinese martial arts was, never mind Tai Chi, Bagua. I know Tai Chi was a little bit more popular, but all of the other things that she was teaching. And then what was the expectation of people with regards to these martial arts based on that?
There were a lot of well-respected teachers in schools in Boston back then. In fact, I think that's an untold story. I'm starting to think I need to work some of my contacts and get them interested in doing some sort of oral history project on the history of martial arts schools in Boston's Chinatown. But T.T. Liang was teaching then. I don't know if you're familiar with his book. Extraordinary books. Yeah, very, very insightful. Of course, the Walam system, Grandmaster Pui Chan had a school then. And there was Quantit Fu was teaching Hungar style.
That's right.
Who else was there? There were just a lot of teachers around that. So I think, any event in Chinatown, you'd have multiple schools involved and everybody's friends, but they're also kind of like, what's that you're doing?
Yeah.
It was very much like something out of the movies. And, there were 3 Chinatown movie theaters, plus one that showed the English dub versions of the Kung Fu movies. So, so Chinatown is small, but I think these schools would draw people from all over the area. And like we said, even from other parts of the country, just to take these classes, not just with our Sifu, but with these other, well-known teachers. And they'd learn the culture. They'd eat in the restaurants, they'd go watch the movies. And then they'd go home and they would, be enthusiastic about what they had learned. So I feel like there was this two-way street. Money and people were coming into Chinatown, and then the influence of Chinatown, the knowledge of Chinese culture, especially the martial arts, was going back into all the diverse neighborhoods and areas. And I don't know if you know anything about Boston's history. In the 70s, there were neighborhoods that were at odds with each other. There was a lot of conflict. But anybody that walked into Sifu school, it didn't matter what neighborhood you were from, what race you were, or religion, or whether you were, an immigrant or born in this country. Everybody was the same in the class. We were all training side by side. We were all practicing with each other. And I think that was just a very valuable experience for Bostonians at that time, to see that everybody could get together. Wow. And very much it was a reflection of her personality. She everybody was welcome in her school.
That's great.
And to that, if I can add, from my perspective, coming at it, a few years later, things were starting to change in the overall martial arts community, and particularly in the Chinese martial arts community. So as a New Yorker originally, if you wanted the so-called good stuff, you were in Chinatown. And you were training with people who are usually from Hong Kong, okay? A little bit from Taiwan. I had teachers from Hong Kong and Taiwan. Then another really interesting thing about Bo Sim Mark is that she came from mainland China. So she was the first one to present things as they were being done in mainland China at the time. And part of that was the lack of I guess you could say, socio-political cleavages within the societies at the time. So it was much more egalitarian.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So you're here, you train hard. If not, okay. It wasn't like certain things were kind of held back or not. And she was one of the first ones to really do that, especially in a much bigger public scale. And for those of us who came out of those early days with her, we still really appreciate that. So, and you can see that now we're trying to document all this. If you see this on these interview videos that her daughter's been putting out, you see this wide variety of people who are all of the same martial arts family as hers, right. of her martial arts family. And it's tremendous. It's powerful. That also coincides with how the martial arts scene was starting to change in the United States then.
Okay.
It went from these, and that's maybe to your original question, it went from these pockets of traditional, okay, and at the time, still pretty dominated by the Japanese martial arts, some of the Korean martial arts, and then you had these pockets of substantive, but still kind of under the radar Chinese martial arts stuff. So in some of the cities in the United States, it was more available, more open, like the bigger cities. But I found, Gene, that when I moved to Boston, I thought it was like an amazing hotbed of Chinese martial arts, better than almost any other city I've been to. Now, maybe because Boston is a relatively smaller city, it's full of all of these universities, so it attracts maybe a certain type of person maybe. But when I moved to Boston, I was so impressed with all that was going on in Chinese martial arts there that I didn't quite see in other cities. So Boston, to me, represents an interesting chapter of American martial arts history, particularly Chinese martial arts.
Are you interested in learning authentic traditional Chinese martial arts of Xingyiquan and Baguazhang? Well, if that's the case, the Huajin Online Learning Program is for you. The Huajin Online Learning Program is the premier distance learning program where you can learn authentic arts of Hebei Xingyiquan and Liang-style Baguazhang in a comprehensive and in-depth manner from wherever you are. Featuring over 120 in-depth lessons covering aspects of individual training, technique refinement, forms, application, partner work, conditioning, internal skill building and Qigong, and much more. The Huajin Online Learning Program has been running successfully for over 3 years and is highly praised by participants within the program. So start your journey into learning authentic classical Chinese martial arts today by visiting mushinmartialculture.com to find out more, or to sign up directly at patreon.com/mushinmartialculture. That is the Huajin Online Learning Program. Enroll today. Yeah, I mean, that's would be back to what you were saying earlier, Gene, about maybe doing some oral or some history series on the history of the Chinese martial arts in Boston. That'd be very interesting to see and hear. You know, I've read a lot about the San Francisco side of the martial arts scene as it grew up in the 1900s and out of the Chinatown and out of a lot of the sectarian bias,
right.
And from what it sounds like, there might have been a little bit of that in Boston, but Bosa Mark definitely was going in the opposite direction. So did she have any issues doing that from the existing establishment of Chinese martial artists, or even Japanese and other martial arts teachers there?
I have heard that when there was some discussion to bring her into the Kung Fu Federation, not all the Sifus were in favor of it. But I think Grandmaster Pui Chan and Grandmaster Wenchel Wu, I heard in particular, spoke up for her and
yes.
Emphasized that, how can we say that we're a New England or, a federation, a regional federation, if we exclude a perfectly qualified teacher just because she happens to be a woman. So yeah. I think there was a little bit of resistance, but I think that she always had people that really respected her and could see what she brought to the table and wanted to collaborate with her.
Were there Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, Stefan.
No, I
Please.
was just going to say, and she was an early magnet for other, like I feel she opened the door, was an early magnet for other Chinese style martial artists to kind of emerge in a certain way, or to feel better recognized. For instance, in New York, there was a maybe the pioneer teacher of Taiji. She taught Wu-style Taiji, Sophia Delza. Very famous, real pioneer. She started teaching in New York City after living in China and studying Wu-style with the head Wu family grand master, if you want to call it that at the time. She wrote a very influential book. She was teaching at the United Nations. She had a group there. She sought out Bo Sim Mark just as a inspiration. She purchased her early books. They actually met together. We have pictures of this, which Chris Jean did do a short video about that, taken from one of the interviews she did recently. So Bo Sim Mark kind of opened a kind of a door, kind of like a psychological door for folks. If you know if you can understand what I mean.
Sure.
And it kind of broke down a lot of barriers that existed at the time. Definitely barrier breaking.
Yeah, and I mean, she was also a what you'd consider a northern Chinese martial artist, even though she hails from the south of China. The styles she practiced were northern arts, and in that environment, we know that the majority of the Chinese martial arts teachers that came into the States in the early days were southern based out of Hong Kong. And teaching styles that are from that area, Hong Kong being a hub where a lot of Cantonese, Guangdong, and Fujian arts, Fujian arts mostly were a lot in Taiwan, but a lot of arts from Canton were in Hong Kong. So she was not only a woman, she was not only opening her doors to everyone, but she was also teaching styles that were quite different to what most of the masters in that initial association were teaching.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned it. I kind of alluded to that earlier, so I'm glad you're picking up that and mentioning that, because that was also barrier breaking. It opened people's eyes to a more greater range of what Chinese martial art is. It truly did, and many people follow suit with that. So if you think of some of the earliest I guess you could say next generation martial arts teachers, Chinese martial arts teachers in the United States, she was probably the first one to expose people to what was happening in the mainland. And as you just correctly cited, what is northern martial art? What does that mean? North China martial art. Yeah. So glad you mentioned that. Thank you.
Yeah, I do have memories of probably in the late 70s and early 80s when we would sometimes be invited to perform for Double 10 celebration or sometimes the August Moon Festival. They used to set up a portable stage in the street and we would perform there. And there was one event where we were waiting to go up on the stage and there was a speaker and it was really revving the crowd up and everybody was like repeating what the speaker was saying, and Donnie was there and he said you guys don't know what they're saying, but they're talking about death to the communists. He said, I'm getting a little nervous because I'm not sure who they're talking about here, because everybody knew she had come from, again, she represented the new contemporary Wushu, which was, kind of associated with the mainland then. And so, but I mean, I did not feel any kind of a threat, but obviously those undercurrents were there at the time. And, a few years went by and it was not even on anybody's radar anymore. Everybody sort of settled down. But yeah, there were times when there were kind of these different factions that maybe were not always getting along together.
The interesting thing that you just mentioned there about, firstly, the whole idea of connecting somebody's personal background, especially as somebody who had gone through what you went through, like Master Bo leaving China to go to Hong Kong to actually get away from the so-called communists that they were saying death to the communists too, and then connecting an art that she practiced. Look, for me, and it's quite important in today's day and age to understand that the early days of the standardization of Wushu is not the same thing as what happened in more recent, I'd say 20 plus years, or roughly there. The days that she was practicing, and actually that's my background as well, my wife's as well. She was from a background as well. She also had the wrong side of the political sphere connections with her grandfather, but that's a different story. But that period of the standardization movement focused heavily on traditional basics, traditional techniques, the full curriculum drawn out of styles that are what we'd consider like the foundational styles for the practice were things like cha, hua, tan tui, etc. A lot of these people learned those styles verbatim as a foundation to then go and do what they were trying to do with the standardization of Changquan, etc. And that's good content. Standardization, people should not forget, is what the Central Wushu Institute does and did back in the day. And to say that standardization bad without looking at the actual details, you can say standardization is bad, but you need to say why it's bad. Well, it's just a blanket statement. The Central Wushu Institute did exactly that. This is just a continuation of that. When you talk about things like Lianbu Quan and Gongli Quan and these foundational practices that the Central Wushu Institute did, the early age stages of the so-called post-New China Wushu movement, that's what they practiced as well. There's no difference there. There was just a pause in the middle for a civil war. And they were trying to pick the pieces up and continue with the movement. What happened thereafter is another story, which I have my own opinions about. I was quite close to seeing that occur over the last 20 plus years. But that generation of Bosa Mark and those people back then, the standardization is something that focused first and foremost on developing a physical body, and that physical body developed attributes that anybody who understands anything about physical movement can understand: flexibility, endurance, strength, stamina. They are developing those which are the foundation for any physical activity. That was the focus. And then from there, of course, you're going to go into doing deeper practice on specifics. So if you're doing Taiji, it's only going to help you to have some more strength, flexibility, coordination, endurance, stamina, all of these things that are developed from there, as opposed to just trying to do Taiji when you don't have this physical base. So for me, it's quite important that people don't use blanket statements, and unfortunately, today they do, unfortunately.
They do, and I very, very much appreciate your recognition of this, because foundation skills, what are those? We can have a whole other podcast just on what is Chinese martial art foundational training. Gene, if you can share this. I remember, Gene, you told me, I think it was when I was last in Boston, when me and Chris were in Boston like a couple of months back, you well, I think it was something that Sifu told you about. How should you particularly prepare? Do you remember what you said? Do you want me to remember that? You want me to?
What was it about? How I wanted to learn soft styles, so I had to first learn the long boxing. I had to first do all the stance work. I had to do all the stretching exercises. You can't do soft styles unless you have some sort of physical strength. You have to. It's not just easy, relaxed. It's a real training technique. It just looks soft, but without the foundation, you're never gonna get it. And then it was the opposite too, for people that came and they just wanted to learn competition styles. They just wanted to learn hard style, and she'd put them in the Tai Chi classes to learn to be a little softer, to relax when they do the movement, learn to move from the center. And people didn't always want to hear that, It's like, I don't want to waste my time with that stuff I'm not interested in. But she could see what you needed to work on to be a fully rounded practitioner, and not just, go with what's easy for you and avoid the stuff that you maybe don't feel as comfortable with. No, she would always push you in the direction of, working harder on the things that could be weak spots for you.
For me, I went there as, I wanted to do all the traditional stuff. I was doing all the so-called hard stuff. That's what I was interested in at the time. My age, my background even before going there. But then, of course, being exposed to what is really good internal style, if you want to call it that, I began to develop a big interest in that when I was at Chinese Wushu Research Institute. So I began to talk to her about that. And she said, Steph, you have a really, really rare opportunity to develop your physical foundation, lead, your strength, your this, your that, to really develop that while you're young. Wait, keep working this. Then later on, maybe when you start to approach perhaps 30 years old, go into your internal style. And so she was really clear with me on that. She said, just, develop this to a high level, and then you'll see what's going to happen later. So made perfect sense to me. At first I was like, but wouldn't it be better if I start, really developing Bagua, my Taiji, whatever? She was like, no, not wait. And that's what I did. You know what I mean? And it still pays dividends today. And it helps. It helps. Not only does it mark me as a martial artist, but it has allowed me to go, pretty deep in so-called internal style. And I took her advice in that because I was ready to just start moving into that. So that's what I did, and it was great.
And I must say, I've seen videos of your Chen style, and your Chen style is top shelf, top notch. So very impressed to see your practice, and I do plan on having you guys on as independent guests to talk more in depth about your own ideas with training specifically, etc. So we can get into your background and your origin stories and your personal roads in those. But I must say, for the viewers out there, if they want to see some excellent Chen-style Taiji, look up Stephan's performances, because it was very, very good.
Wow, thank you for that. Appreciate that.
I want to ask, going into that, what was the curriculum like that she was teaching in those early days and through your personal early days?
Well, you mentioned, Byron, Gong Li Chuan, Tan Tui, all of that stuff that goes back even to like the Qing Mo days, all of that. For me, that was it. The first form I had to learn was Gong Li Chuan, and a very beautiful, refined version of that, as well as all the kicks, punches, stances that Jean was mentioning. So, and very precise, really precise basics like that. So, Jean, what about you could share on that? Probably similar.
Well, I wish I could remember where I have my copy of. She had this booklet.
Yes.
Publication, and it was just about maybe 24 pages, and the centerfold in the middle was her curriculum, and it was. I think it was maybe a 5-year curriculum, and what you were supposed to learn each year. I don't think anybody ever really mastered it. It was very ambitious, but it was dozens of forms. It was learning to do all the jumps, the jumping kicks, the aerial cartwheels, land in a split, learning those on a certain schedule. I think when she first opened her school, she was kind of modeling it on the training institutes in China, but unfortunately her students were all kind of part-time.
Yeah, it's hard. Some
of them were older, and so that became more of a aspirational ideal than an actual study plan. But yeah, she actually had a curriculum worked out, and that's something that I think Chris has been talking about to us as she goes through her mom's papers and looks through notebooks. She analyzed everything very scientifically. I mean, she really did how you can break everything down, and that everybody that studied with her back then, who had trained with other teachers before, we all had the same experience of, the people we used to study with, you'd go into the class and they'd say, okay, I'm going to do some Tai Chi, just follow me. But, she started us with, breaking down like the foundation exercises, then the techniques, and then the movements. And she would break the movements down, and we would just do like the upper body movements of, say, grasp the bird's tail, just the lower body movements, then put it together. And then, do it in a circle. Do it, facing the front, facing the back, so you weren't relying on your environment to orient yourself. She had all these sort of teaching methods that took you so deep into the movement that Yeah, it isn't just something you memorized. It's something that really became part of your natural physical vocabulary.
What you
Um,
mentioned there is the mark of a teacher who knows what they're doing. My teacher's from a
right.
purely traditional background. I mean, he's a Xingyan Bagua practitioner. He did Chuojiao Fanzi as well, but he's purely taught in traditional from very old generation teachers. But what sets him apart from even his other martial brothers that I've met, you know, my martial uncles, the ones that are still with us, etc., is the same approach that you just mentioned, that he would break everything down. And it's something that has influenced me in the way that I teach as well. I break handwork down alone, isolated footwork, isolate stepping patterns, isolated hand patterns before putting them together, especially with more complicated techniques. So you can get the timing, coordination, and the small details to be correct, as opposed to just saying, here's the whole technique, stumble through it. So that is a scientifically mind, if you want,
Yeah.
being
Yes.
applied
Yes.
to a classical movement and a classical practice. And it's the right way to do things, in my opinion. If you're gonna, you know, tradition is, as you know, the often repeated saying is, it's the preservation of a flame, not the veneration of ashes. So to carry forward a tradition, a practice, you have to carry it forward in the best way possible. That fire is the technique and the ability to do it. So that's a very good thing.
It really is. And you know, what I could describe from the curriculum, from my perspective, Jean and Byron, is what she did. What struck me, she would have a system of conditioning. So it was oriented around waist work, waist mobility, and flexibility. And she, you know, a lot of these things you see taught in different schools, different methods, but she kind of put it all together in a pretty cohesive package. So you had to go through this conditioning regimen. Like, I'd never experienced so much multi-dimensional waist turning in my life until I joined her school. It was like, to this day, I still marvel at that. So she would have us do a lot of waist conditioning, a lot of flexibility training. That would be the basis then of your basic training: stances, kicks, punches, combinations, all of that, and which would be the basis of whatever style you were going to go into after that. So for me, it was of course a lot of the more, you know, northern, you know, external stuff, if you will. But for the folks who were perhaps older or not as, if you want to call it, quote, martial oriented, they would still have to go through all that conditioning, even if they found themselves, if their thrust was different. So we were all, she always tried to get us conditioned around waist mobility, leg strength, and flexibility. And that was really distinct to me, because as Byron, as you mentioned, Jean, I think as you mentioned, you know, you go to, especially in the Chinese martial arts world back then, you go there, follow me, learn a form, hopefully it gets corrected, usually doesn't.
Don't ask questions.
Yeah.
Yeah. So very different with her. And much of what, and that particular curricula design or teaching ethic, a lot of that does come from how things were getting standardized in the early days, as you mentioned about the during the early Kuo days, and even what was happening before then in New Republic time in China, and she was like this living encyclopedia of this. First time really in the United States like that. So I hope that will help you and the audience understand that it was a very clear curriculum that we had there of conditioning, basic training, then prearranged, you know, movement sequences, partner drills. We didn't even talk about all the Tui show and partner action she did. Oh my God. And Jean can definitely speak to that. So.
Yeah, you were mentioning earlier the two-person set that we did, which was based on her combined Tai Chi, and I was never interested in what I at the time thought of as fighting. That just wasn't why I came to her school. And the only reason she picked me to be her partner was because we were the same height. And I think a lot of the techniques, you know, classically work best if, you know, your partner is not too tall or not too short. When I look at those videos, sometimes I'm like, oh my God, if I could go back in time, you know, I would be able to make so much more of her teachings, because I had no idea what I was doing. And I want to say she was literally carrying me sometimes. I mean, literally. I remember one time when we were performing that set and we were doing the step back and repulse the monkey where we would do simultaneous leg lifts at each other. I had a sinus infection and my balance was really off. And she felt me starting to fall over and she kind of wrapped her leg around me and held me up until we finished the arm movement. And then she let me go back down again. I was kind of going, oh my God.
Well, and you know what, Jean, I appreciate that story. You know, one thing that stood out for me about her was her speed and power.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just speed and power to look good. I mean, she had a true, if you want to call it that real Kung Fu, deeply developed Kung Fu that would come out in her speed, her power, execution. So if you ever touched hands with her in a certain way,
yeah,
it was like, oh my gosh, you know, so she exhibited all that stuff back when that wasn't really exhibited with such purity and excellence like that. You'd have some folks who do little bouncy stuff, you know, but not, oh no, hers was for real. She'd grab you, you're on the ground. She'd push you. You wouldn't just bounce back. You just slump on your butt. You know what I mean? She'd punch. It was like real martial art.
Yeah. Real
martial art, you know. So obviously for me, you know, young guy going to do that, I was like, that's it. I'm sold.
What was it? Go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say some of her earliest students who had military or street fighting background, they would talk about how she would really put power into her techniques at the very beginning. But they said, you know, again, not all her students wanted to do that, and there were sometimes complaints that it hurt, you know.
Yeah. right.
So, you know, she kind of toned it down a little bit over the years. But originally, you know, she expected you to be able to, you know, absorb that impact and redirect it. And, you know, with there's Fu-style pushing hands technique where you actually let your partner collapse your circle because then you empty the chest and turn your waist and redirect. And and you when we would practice it, you could actually hear the slapping.
Yeah. She'd hit you. Yeah.
Yeah. But a lot of people didn't like to do that. So, you know, she had to adapt sometimes to the American approach.
And to that, you know, and Jean, maybe you could speak to this also. When she was training, especially with the Fu family people, she was knocked around a lot. I mean, because, you know, he had sons, it was this, that. It was hard for her. I mean, they trained her kind of like a guy, honestly.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And if you look at videos of her forms and other things, which are a lot of that is now on YouTube, you see it. You're like, oh my God, you know what I mean? So it's, you see that, you know, that Kung Fu in her. So, yeah.
Yeah, I remember she told a story, I think more than once, about how one of the other students in Grandmaster Fu's school was kind of making fun of her and saying, you know, she was too weak. She didn't know how to do, you know, one of these pushes to the chest. And he challenged her to come at him with full power. So she said, I didn't understand. Now I would never do that if somebody challenged me. But I went ahead and I did a push to his chest, and she said he was spitting up blood for the next week. That's when she said, "Never again will I let anybody, you know, talk me into using."
That's one of the aspects that I think is quite interesting. In fact, one of the public asked about the Fu style and was she teaching the Fu style Tai Chi and the Fu style Bagua.
It was always there, I think, as an option.
Was it something that she taught to a lot of people, or was it specific people that asked for it? I mean, was it something that she didn't openly or easily just teach from the beginning if somebody wanted to learn it? How did she approach that?
You know, we were just talking in the practice I was in this morning about there are so many Fu-style forms. Just, you know, dozens and dozens of Fu-style forms. And she would teach some of them only in private classes. I think because maybe she didn't feel that for the general...
Or that they were ready yet.
Yeah, right. But she always focused on the Leng Yi form, which is a combination of Tai Chi and Pakwa, which comes from the Fu system. That was always one of her favorite forms, one of her performance forms. And it's so much fun to do. And again, talking about the waist turning, it's all spirals and twisting. And she also, their Tai Chi, the Fu-style Tai Chi sword form, which I think is it's 6 sections, maybe a little longer than a lot of the traditional forms. But again, that's something that she always taught and emphasized, learning to do the techniques correctly. But some of the other Fu-style stuff, the Pakwa forms, the tiger boxing, leopard boxing, dragon palm, that stuff, she would teach not every year, but maybe sometimes every 5 years or every 8 years. Because she knew so many forms, she couldn't teach them all at once. So, she would teach the combined Tai Chi, the Lungi, the sword. Those were probably the most common ones. And the other ones, again, if you stayed long enough, you'd get an opportunity to go through a lot of them. But there were others that she only, I think, taught in private classes.
Right.
And then so for me, the way she trained me, I did learn those animal Fu family forms from her. Especially because of my orientation at the time. So I learned all of that from her, and then, but I wasn't doing the Bagua, the Taiji, or the Longi, because again, for me, and as far as her direction of me, was to get the so-called external down pat before you do that. So I actually had that from her. And it was so unique and different. I've heard some people out there say, well, all this combination hybrid stuff that many people think the Fu family martial arts was about, that there's something about that's, that needs to be talked about more. It's not like, you specialize in one style, you go there in depth. The Fu family, they had a variety of different styles that they would practice, and that they kind of developed further in their way, but still very traditional. So you could say they innovated a certain way in the hybrid of it. So they would teach distinct routines, but then they had like this Lungi that Jean mentioned, very, very, very interesting combination form, a very well-balanced routine of Taiji and Bagua. And it's really interesting, and so many traditional Chinese martial arts actually have an early history of just being a combination of things and kind of put together from other elements. And the Fu family actually, I think, did a really nice job of that, even if it appears as if there's just too many forms and stuff. When you really look at it, it's not so many forms, maybe different variations, but it's a pretty well put together curriculum. But as Jean mentioned, few people are going to learn that whole deal. Mm-hmm. Few people are going to learn that whole deal, and for Bosun Mark, that was a challenge, because it was basically impossible to find someone who's going to do the whole thing like that. Sure. And to the whole question of curriculum, if you look at her curriculum sheet that Jean was mentioning. Of course, the whole range of weapons, but a heavy emphasis on straight sword.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that, because she's quite well known for her straight sword. Yes.
And it's not all Fu, it's also, because she studied with Li Tianjia. I mean, Jean, you could definitely talk about this, Her straight sword was honestly, like, no one else was doing straight sword like her in the United States. No one for decades, and her straight sword still has a depth to it. If you look at pretty much any of her straight sword routines and really study her technique, her waist, just her whole, her shanfa for sword, it really was great, so no surprise that her curriculum had a heavy emphasis on straight sword once you get into weapons training with her.
Right.
From the pages of Water Margin comes one of China's fiercest legends, Wusong, the Tiger Slayer. Outlaw, hero, and a symbol of fearless martial strength, reborn as bold martial streetwear. Weather legend.
Yeah, I do have to confess, I was never that interested in the straight sword in the old days. I always liked the broadsword, the Dao. And she used to tease me about it. She'd say it was because I was born in a tiger year, and that's a tiger weapon. But then she'd say, but you look like a rabbit. She'd say, make it more fierce. So I kind of missed out. I took some of the straight sword classes, but it just, my heart wasn't in it. Now I practice it. Now again, as the years went by, sometimes she would pull me in to help out in her private classes where she was teaching the form. So I finally started, learning it, memorizing it. And as the years went by, and now I really appreciate it, but I have to say my heart is still with the tiger weapon. I like the bone. But
oh my gosh.
If I can change track,
Yes.
just an interesting, obviously people know that Bosun Mark's son is the great Donnie Yen.
Yep.
What was it like having him in the school? What was a young Donnie like? I mean, was he coaching? He was assisting with coaching as well, I'm pretty sure. What was his energy like, his personality like in the class? I mean, did it have an influence on the institute as a whole?
that would be Stefan's area of expertise because he was around, but I didn't really train with him. But
yeah, So Donnie, when he came back from his second movie that he made, Mismatched Couples, a pretty pioneering movie. Actually, it was the first movie from Hong Kong that had breakdancing and hip hop in it.
Yeah, I remember.
And I remember that, right? And when he came back to the States, because the movie didn't do that well, it was kind of a little bit too ahead of its time, and he came back home and he just immersed himself back into school before deciding what to do next. And so what he did was the young guys in the school who wanted something more and who had it in them to do something more, he took control of them and started teaching them mainly contemporary wushu, but the good stuff from back then, as well as he would emphasize a lot of weight training, bag work, sparring, all of that stuff. So I was part of that original group that did that with him. And it was very hard training. He was actually quite a taskmaster. He really was. Wow. And a heavy emphasis on basics. And again, that's by way of his mom, of course, also his training in China. And it's still a part of who he is today, where he feels it's much more important to train the attributes than the style or the forms, which sounds kind of, Bruce Lee MMA-ish, which Donnie always actually appreciated that. So that's what it was like. And we would typically train often in the afternoons, but quite often at night. And it was all guys, and we would train until we would drop. You know what I mean? And then at like maybe 1 or 2 in the morning, we would go eat dinner in Chinatown. And it was intense. It was intense. And he, his brilliance in martial arts really, really would come out in those training sessions. So the stuff that you see on screen, it was all there. Amazing speed, ultra high precision, very high adherence to quality stuff. Always wanted to show more realistic martial art, even if it is traditional. Amazing facility with all the weapons, amazing. So we would train in long fist and praying mantis and all that stuff that's associated with wushu, especially of that era. But then we also did all kinds of weapons work, staff, broadsword, all of that. And then supplemented by a lot of sparring, bag work, and maybe just a couple of us with the heavy weight training just to develop, again, the physical fitness that's required for this. Which I still go back to his mom with that, because he grew up being trained basically in that similar way of thinking. Right, he and his sister. So so that's what it was like. That's what it was like.
Was this the birth of the demo team?
Well, Gene, you could maybe speak to this too. Bosun Mark always had a demo team. So when I joined school, I was part of her demo team. Then when Donnie came back, he then developed his demo team.
Oh.
And so of course he pulled me into that. You see, his mom would have her folks who would demo stuff, and then Donnie for that period of time had his folks. And usually often we would do things together, but it was usually like her mom's folks would do certain things, and then his folks would do certain things, and his folks would be, a lot more of the physical stuff, a lot of, weapons, 2-person weapon sets and all of that, but like really heavy duty stuff. And that's what it was like. So it was known at the time that I was part of Donnie Yen's performance team. Others would say, well, wasn't that the Chinese Wushu Research performance team? Yes, it was, but it had these two sides to it, while Donnie was back at the school.
Yeah, I think there's a video on YouTube from our 1986, I think it was, the Dragon Boat Festival.
Yes.
And in front of the hatch shell on the apron of concrete, that was all Donnie's people doing the competition wushu, doing all the really high level competition techniques. Then up on the stage of the hatch shell, it was Sifu and her sister Su Yin, and I did some of the stuff where the students that were focused more on the internal. Were up on the stage, so it was sort of interesting the way it was.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen that video, so I'll look it up for sure and take a look at it.
It is still on YouTube.
Yeah,
for sure. What apart from teaching in person, which is obviously a big impact on the martial arts community, specifically being a pioneer in what she did, what other impact did she have on spreading the knowledge? I know she published some books. So maybe we can discuss that a little bit.
Sure. She not only did she publish a lot of books, but she taught. Jean mentioned her before that she taught at MIT. She also was one of the first people here, if not the first person, to teach a full credit course at Boston University in Taiji.
Oh, really?
Yes. And I used to go to that class, and I'd assisted her in that class a few times actually. And she did that for quite a while. So performing, writing, and by the way, she did the writing. It wasn't like someone else came in. I just needed some translation. But if you were to look at all of the original notes and stuff, which we've been researching right now, she wrote pretty sophisticated. She really did. And all those books, forms books, basic training. She had a qigong method that she liked to teach, and all of that was in these books that were ahead of their time because it presented, again, high quality foundational training, presented and especially for the time, very high quality, clear photos and clear explanations. Also, she was recognized in the martial arts media as well as the mainstream media. So she was on the cover of Inside Kung Fu magazine, top magazine here in 1982. She appeared later on in that magazine, another cover, especially the local press, which Jean can talk about more than I could, I think. She was always featured in the local press. And Boston is a major city, so if you're in a Boston newspaper, that means it's of national reputation. So she was wonderful television profile on a Boston Public Television, which you can see, but it's not on YouTube. It's you have to go to the website of the WGBH to see it. So from my view, she did so much to promote the art. And to have outreach to the community and all these performances that we did and in really top-notch venues, it was incredible. It was really incredible how much she put herself out there to promote this stuff in a very clear, non-political, open to everybody educational way. Right, Jean? I mean...
Yeah, I was just thinking she almost had a missionary viewpoint, that she wanted to bring this art to the West and to the American public, and she wanted to take advantage of every possible avenue to publicize the art and to help people understand. And I remember she used to say to us, write articles.
Yeah.
Yeah, she actually encouraged me to, I started writing press releases for her, and we found, a good response in the local media. And then, I wrote some of those articles, and that sort of led again to a sideline of me writing about the martial arts movies as the years went by. But and I wouldn't have done that probably if she hadn't said, you have to tell people about this. That was everybody write articles. Well, not everybody did it, but it was good advice.
And she was, to my knowledge, she was one of the first to put out on paper what are the health benefits of Tai Chi. You didn't really hear that described in a way that she described it back then. And now, as we see all the medical research, all the science that's been coming out about why Tai Chi is probably the best thing a person should do as they age, she was actually saying a lot of these things back then, and even in print. And so that's another powerful thing that she offered. Also, as the years went on, she began to express her martial arts as performance art. And some people loved it, some people didn't like it, but it was another way for her to find another expression, but a way to kind of let the public see that there's very deep culture behind these old martial arts systems. And it's very hard for people to understand that. So through some of her performance pieces, there was an attempt to try and convey that. And Jean, you actually were part of those.
Yeah. And I remember her talking about, for instance, Wudong sword technique. She'd say there's a twisting movement in the waist. Mm-hmm. And to her, that sort of felt like anguish sometimes. So she would tell these stories about some of the characters from Chinese history that experienced hardship, and she would illustrate that their feelings, their emotions, by doing these Wudong sword techniques. And again, that's pretty subtle. I don't know if I would have picked up on that if she hadn't let us know that this was the thought process she was going through. But just that whole idea of, she used to like to say that Wushu is a sport, a health exercise, and a performing art. Sport, of course, being not just the competition, but also the combat side of it. And she felt that all three of those aspects were equally important.
Absolutely. And Donnie really took that a step further. Now you could say, well, of course, look at him today. But early on, Donnie used to talk about, and I believe that a lot of that is because of what he grew up with. He would say, what's wrong with looking great and still being combat effective?
Yeah.
That it's two sides of the coin. You look at someone like Mike Tyson in his heyday, absolutely beautiful, highly precise, high excellence of physical movement, but devastating fighter. So Donnie used to talk a lot about that with me, and in fact, I wrote an article about 20-something years ago called "Martial Art as Performance Art," where I actually talked a lot about this stuff and what I was exposed to at Chinese Wushu Research Institute from Bo and Mark, later working with Donnie in movies, and for me today, sometimes people will still debate that with me, and they'll be like, what was going on? I mean, what was she trying to do with that? And it was a way to express more of the subtle aspects of Chinese culture in ways that escapes most people. And I generally the elegance that comes from very old martial culture needs to be explained or conveyed more, because the roots of these things go back to not just local militias, but also to sophisticated military martial ethic or martial arts from way back when. But it's hard for people to understand that unless they need to speak the language or live there for a long time. But she was trying to find a way to convey that to folks who maybe don't have all this cultural exposure. And most people who do have cultural exposure still don't get the depth of this. What's really the heart and soul of these combative arts, you know? And so that is much of what she was trying to convey. And sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't, but that's what was going on inside of her. And that was a very powerful way for her to continue to promote this, continue to get this kind of message out that this is as sophisticated and as valuable as a high art as any other high art.
Yeah, I thought of one more example too. She was the way she would analyze the movement, like we said, she was just so scientific about it. She was invited to do a performance with some Emerson College students of The Tempest. And so for the character that she played, she choreographed a routine where she had a long tasseled sword in her right hand and a fly whisk in her left hand. And she was like flying across that stage, and the tassels are spinning around her. And afterwards she asked me, what did you think? And I said, oh, it was beautiful. And she said, how beautiful? And I was like, oh, it's very beautiful. I wasn't sure what exactly, you know, because there was so much going on. And she said, okay, I have two weapons, each weapon half hard, half soft. One weapon I hold at the end of the hard part, and the other weapon I hold in the middle with half hard and half soft. And I'm doing the same techniques, but it's different because I have to control both the hard and the soft in different ways. And I said something to her like, Sifu, I think there's maybe a half a dozen people in the world who can understand what you were doing with that, because that is just so mind-boggling that she was, you know, making these calculations and feeling these very subtle, you know, differences, same but different movements that she was doing. I mean, she was just operating in a lot of ways in a completely different level from most people.
And trying to share that and trying to convey. Yeah. That's the thing, you know what I mean? So even if folks didn't quite get it, you know, for those of us who really been in there with her all these years and part of the school, it's like, yeah, okay, right. You know what I mean? Now we're touching upon something that goes back very far, sometimes often over-articulated in poetry or in prose or literature or even in obtuse medical documents from way back then. But she was actually really trying to convey that physically so that people can hopefully get it. So very interesting. Yeah, Jean, I'm so happy you shared that story. Yeah.
Yeah. But like I said, you know, it was at such a high level that without her explanation of what she was experiencing and what she showed us, I think it would have gone over just about every head. So.
Now, you mentioned that the initial organization on the East Coast, the Kung Fu organization there, did she ever get involved with these official organizations? Did she ever get involved with whatever became a national organization?
Yeah, she was involved with the organizations, and she would have student deputies that would represent her in a lot of the international wushu organizations. You know, I wasn't that involved with that part of it. There were other people that were more administratively involved.
Yeah, the Eastern Kung Fu Federation, she was one of the sitting members of that. So I believe she would have an equal vote on certain things because they had sponsored tournaments and things like that. That organization actually was one of the first, if not the first, to actually offer for the Chinese martial arts world full contact combat competitions, which some people say first came out of the New York scene.
I remember Boston with Jason Yee and all of them down there. So, I mean, that's back in the day as well.
This is even before them. Okay. So she was definitely formally part of that. And then I think what Jean is maybe mentioning, the very first formal wushu organization in the United States, she founded out of her school.
Oh, okay.
And if you look at the names of the people on there, it's Donnie, it's Michael Woods, who you may know from the movies. He was one of the early students there. who to this day he considers his only Sifu Bosun Mark. And then a few of the other people, and this was before I joined the school, actually. So that formed the basis of what later became different subsequent attempts to form Wushu federations that were aligned with what was happening in mainland China. Okay. So the first one came out of the Chinese Wushu Research Institute, and at the time, there were no other Chinese martial arts schools called this. They would have some other fancy, name of the style, the family. She was very clear. I want this to be more like Research Institute. Mm-hmm. So that also had an impact. So I hope that answers your question. Yeah.
No, it does. I mean, I know there's always politics involved in those things. So I was just wondering if she got involved, and then the usual outcome of a lot of these organizations occurred, and
I see.
She
I
gets
see what you mean.
ostracized because that's just a missed opportunity if that did occur.
Yeah, I mean, I think I could speak to that a little bit. To my recollection, she didn't really experience that with the Eastern Kung Fu Federation, but she did move kind of beyond that a bit because she came from mainland China. She had all this other stuff. And then so that helped become the basis of this first national Wushu organization. I see. But then by the time the Beijing team came here, especially when they came here in 1980, they also came in the 70s during the Nixon era. It wasn't just Beijing people, it was other people. When the Beijing Wushu team came here in 1980, that's when you see these other groups started to emerge. Originally inspired by what the original group that came out of the Chinese Wushu Research Institute, but they never really were able to really truly unite as one. And as far as Wushu is concerned, contemporary Wushu, the West Coast of the United States started to kind of
be the hub.
Yeah, kind of became the hub well after Bosun Mark started that. And many of those people actually got their early training from Bosun at Chinese Wushu. So, yeah.
Okay. I'm thinking about how she went to China, I think in 81, if I recall correctly. Again, I'm pulling deep memories out, but she had been invited to participate in the national tournament, which I think was in, maybe in Fujian province.
Okay.
I can't remember. Anyhow,
yeah.
It would be her first time back in China.
Yeah.
And she left possibly illegally in maybe 74, 75. And so she was worried. I remember she was concerned that she might step off the plane and be arrested. And she took Donnie with her, and she also took one of her students who worked at MIT. And I think he was her insurance, that if anything happened, he knew people in the United States that could make a big fuss.
Yes,
right.
But she said she stepped off the plane and everybody was really excited. They treated her like a celebrity, and they thought they loved the fact that she was popularizing
as they should be.
Styles in the United States. And so she actually competed. She did her combined Tai Chi, and she was told after that she shouldn't compete anymore because it wasn't fair to the other people. But Donnie competed. Again, there's pictures of them. Yeah, and that's where she did the combined Tai Chi, and Grandmaster Li Tianji was in the audience, and he said, "That's my form," and so that's when he invited her to Beijing to train at the Beijing Physical Culture Institute there, and she ended up spending, I think, 3 or 4 months in Beijing, and it came back with some forms that she learned there, and also practicing the sword and the Tai Chi with Grandmaster Li.
Yeah.
It was, she wasn't sure what was going to happen the first time she went back. But I think, she was able to build those bridges between, what was going on in China in the late 70s and then, here in the United States. So I don't know if she was absolutely the first one, but she was definitely one of the first people that, could sort of speak to both sides.
Yep, and to begin to bridge that gap organizationally in some form, yeah.
So we've spoken about her history. I mean, we've gotten to know interesting stories. Now let's talk a little bit about legacy of her work of the institute, and what does the next 50, 100 years hold?
Mm. Jean, you want to start or
Well, yeah, I will say, since we started working on celebrating her 50th anniversary, it's been just, very, very inspirational and validating that everybody we talk to immediately gets really excited. They know who Bosun Mark is, and the 50th anniversary, everybody in Boston agrees that this is a big deal. We're there's just a lot going on, and I'm not sure how much of it I can
well,
talk about.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's like what's going on right now. Her daughter, okay, Chris Yen, who also appeared in some movies and did a lot of work herself, pretty accomplished martial artist herself. She has, it really comes down to her and Jean, okay? But as far as specifically what I am very quick to describe is cultural heritage, the real heritage preservation of what this school represents and what Bosun Mark represents. Chris, she has been doing a lot of work on trying to preserve the stories on video, trying to make sure that her mom's image, concepts, everything is being preserved and transmitted accurately with website, with not-for-profit, distribution of the books and the materials, and trying to make sure that the name and the reputation is intact. And Jean can definitely talk about what she's been doing, because Jean has been doing a lot. I mean, Jean is I think, really a heroine of this, Jean. I mean, I know you're not going to say that, but you are. And what's going to happen ultimately, so I've been really honored to be, really part of what I believe is going to be the biggest thing as far as cultural preservation or preservation of the legacy. And that is the Harvard University, Radcliffe College, which is the traditional women's college of Harvard, back in the old days. They have a library there, the Schlesinger Library, which is the world's preeminent library on women's studies. They are now going to hold the Bosun Mark archive there.
Oh, wow.
And this is the first time for a martial arts person, first time Asian American martial artists, female martial artists, a lot of firsts. And this is something that we've been working really closely on. And Chris, by the way, is going to deliver the final tranche of materials, Jean, when we're there, later this week. And so in about 6 months' time, maybe it's sooner, because Chris has done a lot of work to kind of make sure everything is just right. You are going to have a scholarly database based out of Harvard University, where you can go online and do real research on everything that is Bosun Mark and Chinese Wushu Research Institute. It's a huge, I mean, Byron, it is a huge deal.
No, that is a big deal. And congratulations to all of you that are involved, but definitely to Master Bo's legacy, this is a huge honor.
Yeah, I would like to say, it's Chris has been working really hard, but Stephan too. I think, you were a big part of making this happen too. So it was kind of, the two of them have been working with the curator at the library and, making sure that everything goes smoothly. And yeah, we're all really excited about that. I think Chris is going to make the public announcement this Saturday.
That's right.
Yeah.
Correct. So Byron, you're the first person to hear about this.
Oh, wow. Honored. Nice to hear. That's good news.
But it will be announced formally Saturday, so feel free to talk about it now. It's fine. And so you've got the scoop. I just want to say one more thing about that. Chinese martial art, and maybe even traditional martial art in general, just isn't valued highly enough as a sophisticated, deep art form as it is. And it's something that's always been really quite a frustration for me for decades. I'm trying to make sure, and Byron, you surely can relate to this, trying to make sure that the people see there's so much richness here. Yeah. It deserves to be held up just as high as a good piano player, or a good visual artist. And this achievement with Harvard University marks, to me, the first time that Chinese martial arts is being looked at and held this way, especially outside of China. And we're thrilled about it. We are just thrilled about it.
No, that's great. That's put very well, and I agree. And as time goes on and modern society evolves and develops, these values of these arts and the impact they have on life, society, and destiny of certain people like yourselves is not understood and not valued. And so having something preserved in the way it is, especially about somebody as important as Master Bosun Mark, is a great thing. So that's really good to hear.
All right.
Well, I think we're going to end it at that because, as I said, I'm going to set up times with each of you. You're very busy at the moment, but once things calm down a little bit, and we'll do individual podcasts with you guys, and we can flesh out things about your personal journeys and your practices and everything else.
Wonderful. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Thanks for being with me today, and it was an honor talking to you guys. And feel free to send me any links that you want to be made public about the Institute, the history, websites, YouTube channels. I've seen a lot of those interview videos that have been made by her daughter lately. I've enjoyed them, but I'm going to put some links to that. But if there's anything else that you think is valid and should be shared, send it to me. I'll also, after Saturday, whenever there's anything that comes out with regards to the archive, etc., then I'll share that publicly as well through the various channels.
That's great. We appreciate that very much. Yeah.
Okay, you guys have a good evening. It's been great talking, and I'll speak to you guys soon.
All right. Take care. Thanks, Byron.
Bye, G. Bye.